Hello and welcome to a lock-in at the Crate and Crowbar. This week we're talking about reality TV and specifically and eventually the reality TV show The Traitors, which aired in the UK at the beginning of this year to much acclaim. At least acclaim from the kinds of trash people who watch shitty reality TV, which absolutely includes us.
Yeah.
Myself, Marsh Davis, and himself, Tom Senior.
Hello, I am indeed an absolute trash panda when it comes to this stuff. Like hoover it up.
Well, I was going to ask, as the sort of opening question, is reality TV actually good? Or are we just sufficiently bad that we can enjoy it?
I think it can be amazing. I think it has the ability, like very few kind of dramas can do, to actually become a cultural event that becomes a touchstone for almost everyone in your office or among your family. And it's a great source of reality, sort of like it's a great source of water cooler chat, and it's also a great source of kind of it taps into that need to gossip and to really sort of judge people, which is if you talked about perhaps tapping into our worst instincts. Nonetheless, it's very very gratifying, and the way that this sheer range of reality TV shows now. It's such a huge umbrella, and there's so many different types of experience depending on the type of people you like, the type of people you hate or want to hate or enjoy hating with friends.
That's all of them, Tom.
Which is pretty much all of them. Like there's sort of something for everyone to get into. Whether you want the Traitors, I really enjoyed because it was basically 12 episodes and done. But things like Big Brother, it was 24/7 live streams. You could watch them just walking around. It was wild stuff, but people really got into it. So it has this ability to sort of draw people's attention in a way that so the only sort of comparable thing to Big Brother I can think of is recently is like Game of Thrones. Maybe that was a kind of water cooler chat that loads of people got into it, and you could reliably have exciting discussions about the plot twists. But the plot twists sort of happen organically, mostly organically, seemingly by themselves on reality TV, and you don't have to pay millions and millions of dollars to render a dragon.
Oh man, I would absolutely watch the version of Game of Thrones which cuts constantly to confessionals where Daenerys is going like, I can't believe he said that.
So, we'll talk about the we'll get onto the weird kind of tics that loads of reality TV shows have. That thing of cutting away to a completely different room to react to what's just happened is it's very effective, but completely stupid if you think about it for like a second. So anyway, we'll get onto it. What's your relationship to like reality TV?
Well, I was aware that there were always shows which were reality TV, but were never called as such up until the advent of Big Brother. So there was stuff which involved, the disgusting masses projected on television. There was cooking competitions and stuff that predates Bake Off. This wasn't a new invention, but something changed around the time that Big Brother came out because, like you said, it was such a massive cultural event that consumed everybody's waking hours. I think I was at university when the first one came out, and obviously being at university didn't have anything better to do than to watch idiots chat at each other 24/7
and occasionally fry an egg.
Okay, yeah.
The camera's just zoomed in on them. Really, really weird. It's really weird.
I feel there's something about the Big Brother that sort of metastasized into all of these other existing formats and made them more reality TV than they had ever been before. and since then, I've there's so many different splinters. Like I feel like, obviously cooking shows have imbibed a lot of that kind of reality TV medicine. Then there are dating shows, which we'll get into. There's like slice of life shows. There are sort of basic popularity contests, which hew fairly closely to the Big Brother format. And then there are sort of more overt game shows, which have a reality element to them, like The Traitors or The Mole, which we're going to talk about later. But what kinds of reality TV have you got into since the kind of advent of Big Brother? In fact, was Big Brother a big deal for you personally?
This first season actually mostly passed me by, weirdly. I was kind of aware of it via articles and commentary on it. And then I got into it from the second one onwards, and I did fall into the trap. Well, not trap, I just couldn't stop watching it. I didn't watch the live streams of them kind of pottering around, but I'd watch like almost every evening. And it's like an hour of stuff, and there'd be a stupid task, and then there'd be an argument, and there'd be some bonding. and it was just kind of something. Just I was completely enraptured with it, and looking back, I'm like, why? Because and I think because Big Brother, even though it was a landmark in the reality TV genre, I think you're right that this does come from game shows initially. That was kind of the original reality TV in many ways. The thing about Big Brother after that is that the reality TV shows I watch now are so honed and so refined, and the techniques that they use to draw you in and to kind of give you to pigeonhole let you pigeonhole characters and people who are real people, by the way, pigeonhole their characters very efficiently into good guys and bad guys and people you need to keep an eye on, or people who are exciting or very dramatic. And so Big Brother now just seems very crude to me compared to even the most basic reality TV show you'd see now.
It's surprising to me that it's still going. Like, I watch other reality TV shows, and occasionally there's like crossover contestants, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was in Big Brother last year." And I'm like, it's still going.
Yeah,
like why? Because it feels like it's been completely superseded by these much more kind of consciously structured TV shows. And it's interesting. We'll get into the ways that these different structures create sort of incentives and game-like structures even. In fact, I want to get into these shows from the context of game design to some extent. But could we start off by talking about cooking shows? Because I'm absolutely in love with cooking shows. I watch I'm not a very good cook. Like, I can follow a recipe, but I have no particular kind of inspiration when it comes in the kitchen. And yet somehow I'm absolutely drawn to things like Bake Off, which is the sort of the preeminent cooking competition. And I think one of the things I like about it, which I think is a big change in the way that reality TV has evolved over time, is that Bake Off is incredibly good-hearted.
Yeah,
and I think Bake Off has had almost as large an impact on reality TV as Big Brother did, because as Big Brother was evolving and other offshoots were being aired, they were getting meaner and meaner and more exploitative, and finding more and desperate and often mentally unwell contestants to put through this kind of reality TV grinder. But then Bake Off comes out, and it's it's incredibly kind to people. It's very supportive of them. It tries to make everybody in that tent have good relationships with each other rather than acrimonious ones. It selects people who are by themselves pretty nice. There's usually a couple of messy people in there, but they're generally, quite together. They're robust enough to survive the television cameras being pointed at them. And they're really diverse people and interesting people. And they're also talented at what they're doing.
Yeah,
which is not true of really any of the celebrities who came out of reality TV prior to that point. These are all people who are talented bakers, or at least could become very talented bakers. And the show airs with this genuine love of food. It's interested in the subject as well as the contestants and the drama that occurs around them. And there's sort of variably good banter among its judges and hosts. I don't know if you're as big a Bake Off fan as I am, but do you have like a favorite combo of hosts?
It's got to be the original two, and before it moved to Channel 4.
Mel and Sue.
Mel and Sue. I just think because they've worked together forever, and that rapport and banter and ability to sort of work off each other, and they're both just independently very funny and good at talking to the contestants as well. And I think like the people who've come, like Noel Fielding's a really interesting kind of left field choice to go in there, but I think he's kind of was an interesting person to be there. But I always miss Mel and Sue, but maybe that's just because that's what was so comfortable about the show for me, like part of this comforting entity that is Bake Off, that way you sit down for an hour and it's all just quite nice. And the worst thing that can happen is your gingerbread house is going to crumble and Paul Hollywood will just shake his head. It's kind of the meanest thing that could happen on the show, pretty much. How about you?
Yeah, it is interesting how much me and my partner are able to vilify Paul Hollywood, when in comparison to literally any other reality TV show, he is just the kindest, most gentle man. But then he'll look at somebody with his pale blue eyes and say, "This is underbaked," and you're like, "You piece of shit, Hollywood! How could you destroy their dreams?"
But then there's the stick, but there's also the carrot of the handshake.
Oh yeah.
The silent handshake, and then, well, you've made it on Bake Off. Then if you get that poor Hollywood handshake. I've been to like the BBC Good Food Show a few times in Birmingham, and there's one where poor Hollywood was doing signings, and it's amazing the crowds that he attracts. It's amazing how just like Mary Berry as well. She was like a really successful cookbook publisher, author, and celebrity in the food world before that. But now she's kind of national treasure status almost because of Bake Off, which is quite, again, that's just quite nice. It's just people mostly winning, apart from the person who made that gingerbread house.
Yeah. I do love Mel and Sue. Just the fact that they've obviously been friends for a long time and love each other dearly is what made it work. I also really loved Sandy Toksvig and Noel Fielding as a combo because they're so different from each other, but clearly also have that same level of affection. That became my favorite pairing, I think.
Yeah, I love Sandy Toksvig. I really miss her from the BBC 4 Radio 4 programs. She's in News Quiz. She's an excellent host. It's really, you're right. That was such an odd pairing. I mean, I would know, like, one of the things
physically so different as well. Like in the character creator, people have set their sliders to the exact opposite ends,
and they've got like very different sense of humor as well. Like Toxic is quite acerbic, and Norfield is this quite sort of improv comedy ghost kind of wafts around, which is really enjoyable. And one of the things that I'm fascinated about that we'll probably go back to for a lot of the shows is what it's like to be a producer and what it's like to actually do the screen tests with the hosts and how you make the decisions about what types of personalities you put together and why, and whether you know that these two people who are very different will bounce off each other in a certain way that will create drama, or will work together really well, like Mel and Sue and Toksvig and Noel Fielding did, and make that magic that is this cozy magic that Bake Off thrives on. It must be so much fun to be a producer on something like the Traitors, for example. I
don't know. I mean, we'll get to it, but like the Traitors is a little bit more traumatic than I think anybody involved expected it to be.
Yes.
Okay. But so
is Bake Off your favourite cooking show, or is a kind of like tier list you've got in your head of the ones you love and why?
I do, yeah. So I mean, I think Bake Off is the best. It's the ultimate. But it's interesting seeing how other competing baking shows have taken little bits of that format. And so many of them are really poor imitations that don't understand why those components work in Bake Off. And they sort of jumble them together in uncomfortable ways outside of that. And I suppose this is true of like any TV show which apes another poorly, and you think, oh, well, that doesn't work because of this, But it becomes a little kind of more difficult to unpick when it's about narrative structures. But I think because reality TV relies so much on this human component that the structural aspects outside of that become very naked and visible. And so it's really clear when they aren't working. And so, I mean, going back to the game design thing, I think you can see how these different sort of structures produce different incentives and experiences. And because all of these shows are aping each other in like very marginally iterative ways, I think you actually end up, if you watch a lot of them, getting a really finely defined idea of how those structures operate or don't at all. Like that stuff even comes down to this sort of weird, like linguistic mimicry almost. I mean, I'm not only just the structures get shared between them, but also the kind of ways in which people talk get shared between these shows. And so, like, I was watching a few episodes of Anthony Porowski's, that's Anthony from Queer Eye. He hosts quite an underwhelming baking show called Easy Bake Battle. And he himself is absolutely excellent in it. He's a great and lovable host, and he has interesting things to say. But the format is just sort of quite weak. But the thing that's interesting to me about it is that they do the whole Bake Off, and the person going home today is style of elimination. But the difference is that Bake Off takes place across weeks. And so it's meaningful that somebody is literally leaving the set and going home. Whereas Easy Bake Battle is like a 2-round competition that takes place in an afternoon. Like everybody's going home after this. If somebody's not going home, that's kidnapping, Anthony. It's just weird how you see these same sort of things being regurgitated, but in ways in which the meaning of them is lost. And then by watching the ones that fail, you get a sense of why the ones that work do work. I don't know. I mean, have you seen Easy Bake Battle or
I've not.
Is It Cake?
Is it cake? That sounds like it should be a YouTube channel where.
Well, I imagine it probably is. Like a lot of the contestants on it do have their own YouTube or TikTok followings. But I mean, you can guess what the premise of the show is. It's contestants try to make cake that looks like, I don't know, a handbag or a traffic cone or whatever. And then a bunch of judges try to guess which is the real one and which is the cake one from a distance under extremely poor lighting conditions. And it's absolute garbage television. It is just it has this completely arbitrary format to select contestants from a pool each episode. It has just that most hateful production values, and it has this compere called Mikey Day, who I think is on SNL apparently.
Yeah.
But he just possesses like subatomic banter levels. He is just the most bizarre and terrible human I've ever seen in a hosting role. It's like the Joaquin Phoenix Joker. It's like an Amdram audition for that role. Like Michael Barrymore could live on television and still emit more charisma than Mikey Day does. It is astounding. And like everyone else involved comes across as an absolute cretin because of course it has those confessionals where they're forced to blandly narrate the things you've literally just seen them do. And it's one of those things like that's like one of the structures that is now you're everywhere in all these shows, and it makes sense in some situations where, especially in the Traitors, where there is an element of deception. So you see the thing happening in live in inverted commas, and then you see the hidden subtext that is being revealed to you by one of the participants. That makes sense. There is an internality there that is being exposed. But like it's somebody chopping some stuff for a cake, and it cuts to them saying, I've got to chop some stuff for this cake. And you're like, wow, fantastic.
I think when you talk about like mismatching structures onto what the show's actually about, I think there is certainly something where shows just need to be comfortable about when the stakes are low, to just admit that the stakes are very, very low for what's happening. So if someone guesses whether this is a shadowy Victoria sponge looking thing is actually an apple, there's actually zero consequence to the human race or any particular being at all for the result of that. And given that premise, have fun with it instead of turning it into a kind of life or death, you're going home forever type scenario where you've been evicted, you're in exile from the television for what you've done, for misjudging this the Traitors is also falls into this trap a little bit, I think, because they treat the prize as though it's way more than it actually is.
Well, this is a new emerging thing that I think speaks to our fraught moment of finances in this country in particular. Like everybody's like, "Oh, I'm going to get a $5 for this. That's a life-changing $5."
Yes,
and you're like, "Is it really life-changing?" And then you think, "Well, actually, everybody's really in the shitter right now. Maybe it is life-changing." I think there's like a frisson of desperateness to the Traitors, which is absolutely genuine and slightly terrifying for the state of our society. But you're absolutely right that like the whole "you're going home" thing is built up to be dramatic in a way which in certain circumstances work and in certain circumstances really don't work at all.
It's the "you're fired" thing from The Apprentice. It's like they're not they're all doing quite well for themselves actually, and they're going to go home to their nice flat in London and be fine. They're not fired from anything. Their star has risen. They might get some book deal off this or something.
Yeah, if only they were fired. If only they were properly fired.
Some of them are. That's one of the of all the love to hate shows, The Apprentice is just deliberately one of the most goading. Just the people they pick for that are just laser targeted, designed to irritate and frustrate. And part of the fun of the show is just given that the tasks are basically designed to humiliate them over and over again. It's a kind of hate hour, and some reality shows are like that. And again, is that I feel like I should feel guilty about it, but I don't. I watch it. It's great.
Can I just say one more thing about Is
Yeah,
It
of course.
Cake? So all of what I've described so far is not actually the stupidest thing about Is It Cake.
How?
So again, this comes down to sort of like game design problems. The problem is that the way the show is judged creates this sort of these conflicting victory conditions for both the contestants, who are literally the contestants, and the judges, who are not the contestants but think they are. So
What?
So they haven't really thought about where the audience's perspective or sympathies reside at any point. So you'd think it would be with the contestants who do all this work of baking this stuff. And then they sort of completely fuck it out the window by presenting the judging as a mini competition that the judges themselves can win. So like you have these bakers making these cakes, and the judges that judge them are a different trio of judges each episode. They're just bust in from other incredibly non-entity shows. They are so low on the celebrity totem pole that I'm genuinely embarrassed to hear their paltry achievements listed. And then I guess they're all like, they're plied with booze in the green room to get them in this buzzy mood, and they're all this like psyched up to guess a cake, and it's presented as this like exciting time pressured thing. Like there's a time limit during which the judges need to guess which is the cake, and it builds up, and there's this mad panic at the end. And did they get it right? Did they? Yes, they did. Oh my god, they got it right. And all the judges are high-fiving each other and stuff because they've guessed correctly, except they're not the winners, they're the judges. And then you
really
cut
weird.
back to the crestfallen baker whose cake has failed because it's been identified as cake, and they're holding back tears because their dreams of winning this competition have just been shattered. And you get this amazing moment where these judges like suddenly look horrified because they're realizing what's going on, that they've just crushed somebody's dreams at the moment that they thought they were having a great time. And there's this amazing emotional whiplash. It's so fucking awful, Tom. It's just the most vile, gormless farce, and I've watched every second of it.
That's it. That's the thing. Like, I think we have to admit that there's just masterful editing behind these things, and the rhythm of the way they cut between people and the way that they sort of build tension, even using just really cheap devices like music getting louder as the thing reaches, climax. It's just really just ABC stuff. Nonetheless, it has the power to be absolutely gripping. I think part of it is because for me, the space reality TV occupies in my brain is the sort of, I don't really want to concentrate on this. I just want to watch something and basically have it happen to me and be entertained. And that in that state, maybe that sort of those editing tricks and that sort of the pure kind of performance of it and the rhythm of it is actually more effective than the content itself and even the people on screen sometimes. And it's almost like the formula of these things is almost half of the success of it. I find this particularly true for something like Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. Where every single one has exactly the same arc, and it's almost like the 3-act structure for drama, except it's just Gordon goes in, eats a load of food, bollocks the kitchen. They try to get better, he bollocks them again. They do something halfway reasonable but still quite bad, and then he walks away saying, well, I've turned it around unless they're still shit, and then walks off. And it's like, it's the same every single time. I've watched 20 episodes at least of this thing, and I can't. It's just something like very satisfying about all those bits clicking into place, and the fact that there is this sort of start at rock bottom, slowly building up, slight peak potentially, and then the final night they get big opening, and then the mayor is here and everything, and the fondants are basically okay. They've done the bare minimum success that you'd expect for paying for a meal, and then he walks out off into the distance and does a quip. And it's almost like detective shows in that way. So there's really formulaic detective shows like your Midsummer Murders and stuff like that, and Columbo. Always know at the end he's going to turn around and say just one more thing. And maybe it's the rhythm of these things that's kind of addictive as much as what they're actually about, or the themes of the show at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's the reason that these things exist at all a lot of the time. You can tell when it is just format and no substance, though.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I think Nailed It's quite interesting because it's a show that absolutely understands how kind of trashy it is. and it has all of these kind of these formats, but none of it really matters, and it's all sort of, it's almost like a satire of these shows, like it's incredibly self-aware. And even to the point that like Nicole Byer, who hosts it, is a very funny comedian. She'll like occasionally turn to the guest judge and be like, "Isn't it wild that we have to pick a winner out of these fucking idiots?" Yeah, that's good. I tell you what though, so there is one other show which I think competes with Bake Off on its own terms. It's very much of the Bake Off format, but a lot of the things it does makes it sort of own, and that's The Big Brunch.
Ooh,
which is a show I think conceived by and hosted by Dan Levy of Schitt's Creek fame.
Oh yeah,
and he's amazing. Like he's absolutely wonderful in it. He's a lovely, warm, charismatic presence. Very funny, very cerebral as well. And because I didn't know what to expect of him really as a compare. And he's joined by Sola, who I vaguely know from like the Bon Appetit YouTube channel. I don't think she's there anymore because she rightly kicked off about racial discrimination there and got the CEO to step down. I don't know anything about her otherwise, but she's incredibly knowledgeable and kind of like spiky in this really fun, cheeky way. I don't think she would like to be called cheeky, though. I don't think I'd ever call her cheeky to her face. And a guy who I didn't know at all called Will Guidera. I do know that he's married to Christina Tosi, who co-founded Milk Bar, which is a confectionery place made famous by infusing its food with the flavor of cereal milk. And I've eaten there, and it was okay. But they are just this wonderful trio of people that's so smart and insightful, and they're characterful, and they generally want the contestants to succeed, to the extent that during one round of the competition they felt like everybody had fucked it because they hadn't explained the parameters clearly enough to them, so they just get them to do it again, having made the parameters clearer. And there's just this sort of I don't know. There's a sense of humility about the show, and it does things even like to the texture of it. Whereas Bake Off has its own kind of musical character that it enforces. This has a lot of sort of like jazz music in the as the kind of the kind of linking theme. But it's really good. The contestants are nice. I think it struggles initially, as a lot of these shows do, because there's too many contestants. So there's not enough space for them to explain what they're doing. And that sort of tips you the wink to the format, because if the show focuses on a contestant for too long during an episode, well, they're up for being eliminated, I guess, this episode. And I wonder if that is a thing that these shows really need at all. Do you think the elimination format is something that is central to these sorts of cooking, particularly the cooking shows?
I would much rather start with fewer contestants and see the full range of what they could do. Especially because with cooking, so I love MasterChef. I think my favorite is MasterChef The Professionals, because especially for the skills test at the start, when they're walking completely blind, and it's stuff that perhaps they should have learned at college, unless Monica Galetti set the challenge, in which case it's like, extract the innards of the sea urchin and then distill its soul into a paste and serve it on toast. And then it's like they just sort of their faces become very still, and you can see a sort of roiling panic just behind the facade. And then they just start chopping and hacking at things desperately to try and make it work. And then you'll have Mark Swearing, and he'll just be like, "Oh, cook a really nice steak," and then often they can't somehow because of the nerves, because they're not used to being in front of camera crews, and that's such a huge thing with these shows as well. When people mess up, they're in really weird conditions, especially when it comes to baking and cooking. So, for example, like, are the ovens they're using unfamiliar to them? And if they're sort of ovens running off gas stoves, are they at different heats? That's huge for whether a cake rises or not, or whether a loaf rises. And it's massive for, like, if you're overcooking a rack of lamb. And all of those things are pasted over, because what comes onto the plate is always because the stakes are so high and they're about to be eliminated or they're going to go through, everything is on this one plate of food. So one mistake throws all of their creativity and potential out of the room. And with cooking shows, I find that like quite sad, because I don't know what Sarah could have potentially done in a couple of rounds. Because her fondant wasn't gooey enough in the middle. I'd much rather they sort of skip the first few rounds, where there are loads of them, and just had 10 who competed like over and over again, and then they went down to 5, and then there was the final 2. That would be more fulfilling and interesting to me. And I feel like I'd see more cooking, which is, especially with MasterChef, it's supposed to be all about technique and innovation and being creative, and then trying to get to the next level, especially for the professionals. They might be head chef somewhere, they want to get their own restaurant, maybe get a star one day. That's real stakes. That's someone's real life on the line. And the Traitors too, it starts with 22 people. 22. And the episode is like an hour long, and you're only really going to get to, you're only going to remember 3 of them, really, realistically. And no matter how many kind of talking head bits they do. And I do wonder why they get so many people in. Maybe it's just because it lowers the risk of them not getting any material at all. If you have 22 people, there's more chance that someone is going to clash with someone, or groups are going to form, alliances are going to form. Whereas if you only have like 5-10 people, maybe that's sort of, if everyone sort of gets along, maybe you don't have a show when it comes to something like the Traitors.
I think that's maybe easier to cope with in a show which has like the substance of it is purely social, like the Traitors. Whereas I think in baking shows, it's really problematic because there's actually like a process that is interesting and essential to expose there. And if you have too many people, you just can't spend enough time with them to show people what they're doing. And in some baking shows don't care about that, and that's why they're less interesting to me. Not that I have there's a sweet spot. I don't have like enough of a cooking brain to for like really detailed breakdowns of cooking to be possible for me to comprehend and therefore invest in. But there is like a medium rare point where it's just enough information that I understand the stakes and the complications, but it's not too much information. I think like the one of the Iron Chefs, I think it was called Iron Chef Quest for an Iron Legend, which was maybe on Netflix, hosted by Alton Brown and Kristen Kish, and that was a bunch of. They may have already been Iron Chefs. I'm not sure. They were like famous chefs, basically doing battle with each other. You only get 2 chefs and their teams in the kitchen at any one time. And I think that did a good job because they were doing incredibly complicated things, but the show did a good job of dividing the time and having things be explained, the significance of certain kind of endeavors and the time pressures that were people under, without kind of detracting from the ticking clock too much. There was a show called Baking Impossible, which I absolutely don't recommend. It's another shameless bake-off in rip-off in format, but it has this unconvincing twist of pairing bakers with engineers and having them construct robots out of edible substances.
Wow.
But ultimately, like, this robot would ultimately shudder down like a course and then serve some sort of pudding to the judges. And it was a really weird show. Like, just the choice of people it had to judge it. So I had this, like, I don't know any of their names. I had this like leather jacket clad American popular science dad guy. I don't know what his role was. I suppose he was there to judge the engineering element. And I had this like, I don't know who this guy is. Like, he was quite funny in the end, but he appears like this frail Irish child who I guess is like either from TikTok or the Victorian era. And then a very prim lady who would like tell people off about the quality of their ganache that was served to her from the heart of a robotic scorpion. And the host is a magician, which is again, well, I think it's even weirder because at no point is it alluded that he is a magician until like 3 episodes in. He just disgorges a whole donut and it's like, ta-da! But the problem essentially with this whole setup is, I mean, it's fucking stupid. There's literally no reason that anybody should be interested in making robots out of gingerbread and fruit leather. But like, the 2 parts just don't really sit well together. And the fact that the quality and the process of the baking is always going to be eclipsed by the need for it to be robotic in some way. And the ambition of the robotics is always going to be hampered by the material restrictions. And there isn't just, and because of those two incredibly difficult tasks being slammed together, there's no time to explain what anybody's doing in any level of detail. Unlike Bake Off, where you're on the edge of your seat every time a meringue is decanted. And so the result is that all of it looks shit. Like, I mean, I guess it looks amazing for like a velociraptor made out of pecans or whatever, but the bar is set quite low because of that innate compromise, and it just never escapes that. It's a really strange show. But the point of bringing it up is that it has this problem where it just can't feature the things that are interesting about the challenge. It can't feature the challenging aspects of the challenge because it does just haven't time to accommodate such a difficult premise.
It's like you've got Bake Off and you've got Robot Wars, and independently they're both good shows. But they never needed those Venn diagram never needed to happen. And I do wonder how these things get invented or commissioned. That feels like a proper back of an envelope. After a long wet lunch type idea, really. But how does that then get backing or get made into a pilot, let alone an entire show?
I don't know. I assume like one of the frail Irish child is probably like a TikTok. He calls himself a baconeer, which is
cool,
obscene. But like, I assume he has like a TikTok channel where he just makes a bunch of weird shit out of food, and that's done really well. And so Netflix were like, "What's zeitgeisty? What are the kids like?" and signed it on that basis. But yeah, as a thing that supports a wider competition, nah,
it's not this one.
No.
Oh.
Should we talk about dating shows?
Yes, this is fascinating to me. The way that as dating has moved like increasingly online and into apps, it's become increasingly sort of parceled out and defined in really odd ways by a variety of very strange reality television shows. Which also, as a kind of side note, a lot of this stuff supports people's kind of Instagram careers, and a lot of the people who want to become influencers or already are influencers coming into these reality shows and wanting to shine and then get deals. So there's a kind of meta layer to these shows as well that also makes them doubly interesting, I find. I think the one I've watched most recently, which was early last year, I think, is Love is Blind, where you get a bunch of contestants on one side, a bunch of contestants on the other side, and they never see each other. But what they do is they go into these booths that are separated by an opaque screen, so they never see each other, but they talk to each other, and they lounge around on couches and help themselves to the minibar, and they just sort of chat and get to know each other. And then at one point, they towards the end they get to decide if they want to marry someone.
Wow, that escalates quickly.
Yeah, so it's a big thing, and it's kind of half Big Brother because it's half them sort of hanging out on each side of the divide in their kitchens and sort of chatting, say, "Oh, I really like this person. I really feel like I've made a connection," and then part of it is them in these really intimate kind of weird booths with the person on the other side of the screen, and having sometimes weirdly intimate conversations, and you start thinking, well, what I always think about these things is sometimes the contestants become so familiar with each other, like almost to a point that it doesn't seem like it could possibly be real. But the more I've read about behind the scenes stuff, like apparently people do forge these really intense relationships in these trapped environments, and it's part of the kind of pressure cooker nature of these shows, of just confining people to hotel rooms, only let them see other members of the cast. And because they have to stay in those hotel rooms because they can't leak anything. So they're often kind of sequestered aside, even as, in the Traitors, 2 people are eliminated before the show even begins. And they just have to sit in a hotel and not talk to anyone until they were reintroduced into the show later. And it's a kind of, there's a darker sort of psychological experiment side to this that sort of pushes certain personalities into very intimate and kind of revealing and exposing situations, and they're incentivized by their often their need to achieve a degree of notoriety online to further their career as influencers. And what results is tears, breakdowns, screaming, people running away from the altar, and a bride running out of a church and falling into a ditch is part of the show. And again, it's the kind of rubbernecking thing. I could not stop watching it. It was just so fascinating to see these people just seem to form these bonds so quickly in such a strange alien environment, while also just questioning, is this real? Because a lot of it seems so staged, especially when it comes to the end and they have to sort of live with each other for a bit before they decide if they really want to marry each other. It's such a strange. For me, that's one of the weirdest ones. And I'm going to be fascinated to see season 2, because there's going to be. Yeah, I'm deeply into this, obviously. What's really interesting to me about these shows is when the first series is a big success, everyone who comes into the second series has watched the first series. And so they're all people who are going in and also have their own ambitions beyond the show itself will be seeking to manipulate the format to their end. And so they may want to go in being Nasty Nick from the first season of Big Brother, for example. You might go in saying, oh, I'm going to be the Nasty Nick for this one. That's my angle. And it's going to be interesting to try and pick out who's genuine and who's trying to play an angle and who's trying to become famous in a certain way. And for me, dating shows more than anything, any of the other formats has that layer. And it's almost like a meta layer of intrigue. And that's a huge part of it, because the number of articles that come out around these personalities afterwards. So even for the Traitors, I was Googling the Traitors earlier just to sort of, see what the fallout was from it. And most of the top hits were lists of their Instagram accounts saying, hey, here's where you can find them on Insta. And that's kind of part of the kind of the mill behind these shows. And I find the fallout and the kind of commentary on it and what happens to those people almost as interesting as the shows themselves, actually. Which ones have you been watching?
Well, I watched. I haven't watched Love Is Blind. My partner watched Love Is Blind, but I declined to watch that one. Maybe I should pick it up. But there's one which uses that format, at least initially, for good, and that is Too Hot to Handle, which has the twist that it basically entraps a bunch of sex addicts, like people who are genuinely, tragically, pathologically addicted to sex. And it traps them basically. They think they're going on a dating show, but in fact, what they're going to be is blackmailed into celibacy by the fact that the prize pot reduces massively every time one of them ranks another off.
That's extraordinary.
Aside from the fact that this is very funny, where the contestants first realize what the rules of the game are, I actually think like the first couple of seasons, I mean, assuming it's not all completely faked, like assuming the first couple of seasons genuinely help these hapless fuckboys and girls find each other to be actual humans. Like it's what you said, these people form, because of the pressure cooker nature of these sort of places, they form incredibly intense bonds with each other. And that is actually useful in a scenario where people, through whatever reason, have closed themselves off to empathy and don't see members of the opposite sex or their, people they're attracted to as being fully human and worthy of their empathy. And like, it's really heartwarming in a way to see, it's a very low bar of empathy they need to reach, but it is quite heartwarming to see them meet that like meager achievement. And you're in the confessional booth, you have somebody like just going like, wow, like, so women are like actual human people. Although the show doesn't like dwell on it, clearly a lot of these people are the way they are because they're really badly wounded. There's definitely like abuse survivors among them who are just so terrified of being victims again that they start to reenact the forms of control that were used against them. And so you get all these kind of these cocky people who are like employing MRA style kind of tactics, and to see them get broken out of that and actually forge, if not romantic relationships, then friendships of a sort with people who they would otherwise just shag one evening. I think that's really good. And it has the same problem as you're saying with like Love Is Blind, in that future seasons, I mean, they do a good thing with the second season where they pretend they create a fake show and then reveal that they're not on the fake show after all. They're in fact on Love Is Blind, and some of the contestants know what they're on Too Hot to Handle, and some of the contestants recognize Too Hot to Handle and seen it, and some of them haven't. But I think I'd be very surprised if any of the contestants from season 3 onwards don't twig that they're on Too Hot to Handle.
Yeah.
And the show as a whole just gets less sincere, I think, about helping people. And along with that, there's a sort of like atrophy of the format where it becomes almost 75% confessionals. And you just know that they don't have anything at that point.
Right.
Like, there's nothing real there anymore.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to sort of the idea of sort of the sort of commentary on these shows is as interesting as the shows themselves. Like Love Island has triggered loads of discussion around the. So there's one guy who the way he was treating the woman who's ostensibly with on the show and berating her, bringing her down, and everyone and psychologists looked at that and were like, that's coercive control. And there were people writing articles about what this looks like, and this is what this dynamic this exists to empower him and put her down, and that created a loads of interesting debate, and loads of people who probably never heard of that term before might have been introduced to this idea, and maybe you think back to times where you were in a conversation with someone who was behaving like that towards you, and so actually the sort of meta-analysis of behaviors that emerge from these shows can be has become more sophisticated. I don't remember any of that stuff happening with Big Brother, for example. Some of my favorite stuff around Big Brother was Charlie Brooker's excellent ongoing columns, where he was just fascinated and horrified in equal measure, and again could not look away, but was just like as acerbic, but also just could not resist digging into every kind of wrinkle of it to pull out weird dynamics, and it really got into the drama. And I think he collated all of his early columns into a couple of books, actually, and I found them to be excellent at the time. I'm not sure, like, we did now, without the cultural context of the time, they might have lost some of their power, but I found that to be pretty good then. But these days, I find there's lots of interesting articles and reflection on the behaviours of people in the shows, and that seems to be progress, even if people might hate the formats themselves. At least it's kind of an avenue for discussion about how people treat each other sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Are you into the reality TV shows which aren't really real? Which is to say, the sort of the structured reality ones, to use a phrase which you literally just told me before the show, right?
Jamie Britton, our friend and fellow podcaster, said this to me, and I was like, "Oh, that is just such a beautiful phrase to describe these things." And it's like made in Chelsea and things like that. It's where they're basically socialites, and they're falling out with each other and dating each other, and starting business ventures with each other, basically, but mostly going to parties and looking pretty and dressing in great suits. It's kind of a huge part of it. But the discussions they have are just so shot with multiple cameras cutting between them. The cadence of the discussion is purely it's a fictional construct. It's the sort of discussion you would see in a badly written drama. And yet you're supposed to believe that this is really happening in real time. And the fascinating thing about them, the reason that I can't watch them really, is because trying to guess what's real and what isn't is futile. It's impossible, because it's all so strangely presented, and it's so pristine, and it's so inhuman in its delivery. And you don't. I feel like I don't understand they're like aliens. They've landed. They've observed reality television from space, and they've plopped these beautiful people out of some silos, and they've made them bump into each other like characters of The Sims, and have incredibly staged conversations about how I'm feeling much closer to Johnny these days. Oh, are you? Well, I used to be dating Johnny. Are you sure? Very. It's like watching Captain Scarlet. Like, it's sort of like the kind of weird, jerky mannequin mechanisms. I find it quite disturbing, but people love it, and I feel like I'm missing out on something. Sort of like not understanding what the key to this is. But no, I that's the reason that I can't really speak much about them, because I just don't understand how they work or why people like them at all. Have you seen any of them?
No, I mean, I've seen clips enough of them to know that they aren't for me. I don't really understand it. Like you say, it either has to be real or it has to be some sort of more sophisticated fiction.
Well, yeah, I mean, why not watch Hollyoaks? That feels to me like it's kind of the same thing, but there's the script and the plot lines, and the conversations make more sense in Hollyoaks than they ever do, from what I've seen in these shows. But yeah, that's a whole sort of strata. There's so many of them as well, and I think maybe that sort of chimes into like a particularly American series, like the Housewives series, that kind of revolve around just wealthy socialites who are just kind of living their lives, and the various sort of Kardashian programs as well. And this kind of ambiguity, which I find very anxiety-inducing, about what is real or sincere and what is authentic and what isn't. I just feel
it's
as
the
though
whole sort of the blurring of real and fiction when it comes to celebrity, the parasocial experience, and the fact that some of these families are entirely everything that they do is designed in order to garner attention for their production line, basically.
Yeah, parasocial relationships is what these shows thrive on completely. That and kind of there's a kind of interesting cocktail of being aspirational while also allowing you to sometimes dislike the people who have achieved this at the same time. And it's almost like weaponized jealousy to an extent, and where you get to look at the houses and go, wow, that's amazing, look at that swimming pool, and then someone does one of the housewives is really horrible to someone else, you go, oh, but she's horrible. I mean, if I wouldn't be like that if I was in her position with that house. And it's sort of these shows kind of enmesh status with parasocial interpersonal relationships breaking down in a way that can be quite poisonous, I think. I don't enjoy it, at least. I don't find it entertaining.
You said you watched Below Deck before we started recording. Is that part of this same kind of strata of reality TV? No,
it's more of a it is part of it. It does have the confessional booth thing, where you're watching them do. I'll just describe the show first. So Below Deck follows the crews on a super yacht who like maintain the boat and serve the guests and put on entertainment for the guests. And each episode features a charter where extremely super wealthy people come on board and they charter the boat for a couple of days, and the crew have to basically do everything they want, pretty much. If they want, martinis on a beach somewhere, they have to plot a course there and find a cove. They have to drive out in their tender. They have to set it all up, and the show does a really good job of showing how much hard work goes into this stuff. They're really hardworking people who just kind of setting up. They're kind of maintaining the boat. They're all safety experts. They're great swimmers, but they also have to be entertainers and they have to smile no matter how awful the guests are. So some of the guests come on, and some of them are okay, but obviously some of them are absolute crooks, just slime balls, totally horrendous, just demanding, demeaning towards the staff. So it does have that aspiration versus and sort of vilification angle. That cocktail I was talking about, that is there, but it's also a kind of reality show where, of course, the crew are basically, as one of them described it, we're on a prison ship, because they're all bunking together and they can't leave. So there's that pressure element there, but it's real. Like the fact that it's tapped into, it's given us a cross section of a slice of a real industry that has been happening all this time that I've never seen or really thought about, is a fascinating part of it. And you get to know the crew, and there are crew members who have like certain ticks. They become characters and they keep coming back in future seasons. So, for example, there's a chef on each super yacht, and the chef has to do everything by themselves, pretty much. They occasionally get some help from the stews, like to do some shopping if they're really desperate. And as a result, they're all kind of bonkers. Almost every chef that comes on board, they're kind of absolute wild cards. And you get to know their various different personalities. And like one chef gets really ill, so he has to leave. And so the captain gets on the phone and, hey, it's the chef from the last season. He's back, and he's just as crazy as ever. And all of that does feel a bit kind of manufactured, but there's a real sense that there's genuine industry happening here. Like they really are having to take on these guests, and I think the guests get a discounted rate for appearing on the show. And as a result, that like they have to deliver the quality of service that the yachting company and the yacht and the people who own that yacht actually require. So they do have to be really good at their jobs, and amidst all this competence and like admirable work ethic, they'll occasionally just go ashore on one of their off days and go to a bar and just like start screaming at each other, throwing glasses, being horrible, being kind of racist to one of them for no reason, and then just kind of this kind of total social breakdown happens. And it's kind of believable because of the situation they're in and because of how cooped up they are with each other. And because often it's lots of different people in a sort of transient stage of their life in their early 20s, where they're going to be yachties for a couple of years, make loads of money, and then just go and do what else they want to do. So you have these really interesting characters of people coming together. It's absolutely fascinating. But at the same time, there is that sense of certain characters, as the series go on, get more and more screen time, and they sort of become the de facto stars. One of them is Kate, who's a chief stew. A chief stew is the head of the people who run the service aspect of the boat. So they turn all the beds, they clean everything, they serve the guests who are often awful to them, and it's they have incredibly high standards. And Kate was a really interesting character. And interestingly, did you know there's a US version of the Traitors?
I only found that out when I was looking at Wikipedia earlier.
Yeah, and Kate is one of the guests on that show. She's
yeah,
completely by surprise. I was watching it earlier this week with my partner, and it's like, oh, what? It's Kate from Below Deck. And so you see how, to me, like the show has kind of crossed the line at some point where it stopped being about insight into this really fascinating industry, this glamorous but also kind of slightly grubby industry. I found and has become another sort of avenue to success for people who want to behave a certain way and adopt an abrasive personality in order to appear on reality television shows. So the Below Deck for me is a transition from something very interesting to something where I kind of I've lost trust in it in a way. And I feel like to enjoy reality TV, even at a stage as it can seem, I have to have a degree of trust that at least a little bit of it is authentic somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I suspect that's true of a lot of the life cycles of these shows, like American Chopper or whatever that one is, where they're constantly searching for some hidden gold on an island somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Like they just end up becoming too much about the circus of the show, and then the characters need to end up playing themselves in ways which are hyper real or completely fictional.
I think Below Deck is the best structured reality because it has the most reality in it, and also there's a bit of that the cooking show thing where I really admired the expertise of watching them bring a super yacht into a very narrow space in a port. Like they'll show every aspect of that, them throwing the lines out, the captain barking orders down the radio, and you watch them just scraping by these other super yachts literally like 3 feet away from them, slotting in incredible precision. It's like, wow, that's amazing. That's such an incredible skill. And I take joy in reality TV, watching people be really good at what they do. And that's something just inherently heartening. I'm really glad that they included all that stuff.
I would like just to name check The Circle at this point, because I do want us to eventually in this podcast about the Traitors start talking about the Traitors.
Yeah, probably should.
But I do want to name check The Circle because it's one of my favorite of these shows. It's basically just a popularity contest, so a bit like Big Brother in that sense. Although it's not voted by the people, don't get voted off by the public. The contestants themselves vote each other off, and it's basically. The premise of it sounds really dumb in that it's Big Brother, but the players never actually meet each other. Instead, they're all in the these isolated hotel rooms in an apartment block near Manchester, which for some reason the program intercuts with glamorous aerial shots of Chicago, as though that's ever going to fool anybody. And they communicate with each other solely via like a social media style text-based chat system. And this means that some people can pretend to be people other themselves. They catfish, essentially.
Oh, well.
And they all form alliances with each other. They get to know each other a little bit, and then they vote for who they like most. And then the person with the worst rankings gets voted off. And there are various twists to that format every day. So sometimes like people get voted off, and then the show will say, you two are coming back, but you now have to cooperatively play this character.
Oh my gosh.
And so on. And it's actually like, it's surprisingly riveting because it's all about identifying and befriending people who are the genuine straight shooters who are in the competition and who don't want to play a tactical game. And you also have to sort of like oust the untrustworthy. And there tends to be like this kind of catfish hunt where people who are catfish are always end up being voted out, even though that doesn't necessarily mean that they are untrustworthy people. It just means that they came on this show thinking they wouldn't be as popular if they played themselves. But there's all this kind of this suspicion of who the catfish are. And the show will like throw fun spanners into the works by like creating games to the contestants which could potentially expose their lack of expertise in an area which would then destroy their cover as catfish. And it's really surprisingly fun, and occasionally it's even moving. All the contestants are really lovable this season. Last season, 2 of the Spice Girls were playing a catfish.
Wow.
Which is really good. They are obviously a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
Maybe I just wanted to mention it because I've spent too much time in the circle not to mention it on a podcast about reality TV.
That's really interesting because I remember seeing adverts for it and I sort of dismissed it for saying, "Oh, that's a bit torn from the headlines. It's a bit sort of, that's Catfish is its own show, and catfishing has become the source of many successful documentaries and things like that."
Yeah, how real is catfish? That's another question.
Really, that's a good question, isn't it? Yeah, it's the media meeting itself, and so the idea of turning that into something that's fun is kind of. I assumed it would be kind of mean, but it sounds like they do it with the contestants approaching the right spirit, knowing kind of what they're getting into enough to not be crushed by being mistaken, or maybe they are.
I mean, there's a bit of drama that a lot of the people they have on the show say they operate in a heightened register. But I don't think any of them are brutalized by the experience. Generally it's done in good humor, and this season is great. And again, like I think we'll get into this when we start talking about the Traitors, but there is some of my favorite people on that show have been the ones who are forced to play strategically, and then you see quite a lot of their calculation. And it's one of the few reality TV shows that doesn't cut away to confessionals, because they can have this text conversation and they can be editorializing, explaining their thinking at the same time.
Yeah, it's really
so
good.
It doesn't need to cut away to this confessional, because they can literally, the producer will just say, "Can you explain why you said that?" You don't hear the producer say that, but then you get the contestant explaining, I'm trying to make her think that this, and so forth. But it's quite good in that sense. Shall we move on to the 2 shows that I wanted to talk about, really? Sorry for talking about cooking for so long, but The Mole, I think, as a sort of amuse-bouche to the Traitors. So there's 2 versions of the show. There's like an early 2000s version of the show. Maybe it was in the 90s as well. I've only watched 2 seasons of it. I've only watched the celebrity seasons, which are the only ones that are available, I think, on Netflix. And there's also a new version of the show, which was also launched on Netflix with non-celebrities. And the premise is that you have a bunch of contestants who each day do a bunch of challenges to earn money. However, one among their number is the Mole, someone who has been hired by the show to sabotage the efforts of the contestants, which is an exciting premise. However, to ensure that the Mole remains a threat throughout, so it wouldn't work if you could vote the Mole off, for example. Yeah. So instead of having a voting system, as you might expect, they have the players conduct a secret quiz each evening. I mean, not secret, but private quiz for themselves, where they have to answer questions about who they think the mole is, some of which is specific, like what's the name of the mole, and some of which is more general, like what's the gender of the mole, or even like things that they may or may not have observed during the course of the day. For example, like what color livery was on the car that the mole was in during the so-and-so task. And those kind of more general questions, especially the questions that people might just have missed if they weren't taking notes all the time, that allows the players to sort of a kind of bit of space to kind of hedge their bets. And some players, like because at the beginning of the game, not clear who the mole is, some of the players will sort of split their answers. So it could be lots of different people based on the outcome. They'll do the quiz badly in a way, but because only the lowest scoring contestant of the quiz gets ejected, by hedging your bets early on, you may actually be far enough in the rankings to escape being ejected from the game. And in the way it worked out, like the celebrity version from the 2000s is quite entertaining, because I think the contestants are not in any way strategic thinkers, but are in fact absolute fucking egomaniacs. And they just descend into abject paranoia and hysteria almost immediately. But when it comes to the new version, which is full of people who are seemingly quite intelligent and strategic, it actually ends up making the show barely watchable, because the problem is that the questionnaire incentivizes the real players to also pretend to be the mole.
Yeah.
So because if they take suspicion that way, their fellow contestants will answer the questionnaire identifying them, and then those people who answer so erroneously will then be the ones who are ejected from the game rather than them. So the result of this is that everyone starts to openly sabotage the tasks in ways that just get increasingly ridiculous. And at points you have contestants who are just brazenly trying to out stupid each other. They're trying to drag a sled up a hill, and one of them is just like, oh, I've forgotten how legs work. And it's not only incredibly visibly frustrating to the few contestants who actually want to complete the task successfully, but it ends up being kind of shit to watch, because naturally you just want to see things get done, and there's nothing gratifying about a bunch of clueless people pretend to be even stupider than they actually are. And then the other thing is that the show doesn't tell you who the mole is. The whole thing is trying to keep you wondering who the mole is until the very final episode. Obviously, the mole never answers the quiz incorrectly, so they're always there until the very end.
Yeah.
But the show can just disguise the mole's actual sabotage by editing it to a minimum. And so it makes it very difficult for viewers to guess who the mole is until the finale anyway. But that, even if that increases one's suspense, it means it takes out the major strategic heart of the entire show. You can't root for them. You can't get invested in their subterfuge. You can't experience vicariously the risk that they're undergoing, because you just don't fucking see it. It's just not on screen. And so in the end, you just have a bunch of gormless idiots, pretending they've forgotten how maps work. It's really agonizing. But it's really interesting then to compare it with the Traitors. Have you seen them all, by the way?
I saw the original version way back when, and as you say, I couldn't find it, the one with actual contestants, and I found it riveting at the time. And it might be that the format was a bit different. I remember knowing who the mole was, I think, and seeing their machinations play out was kind of delightful.
Is that because you simply guessed who the mole was?
I can't remember if they revealed it or not. I thought that they made it explicit, but maybe not.
Well, not in the episodes I've seen.
I might have just completely misremembered it, because it was 15 years ago or something. But I remember it being interesting enough that the sabotage, I must have guessed who it was, because I remember just really enjoying seeing, because their sabotage was relatively subtle. It wasn't whoops, I dropped the thing. It would be oh, this door's locked. How is this locked? And he'd just gone on there earlier, and they couldn't get to where they. That sort of thing. That's not an exact example, because I'm sort of drawing from distant memory. But I remember, it would be almost like a kind of a Poirot mystery, where kind of whodunit. It's they've clearly been blocked in a really blatant way, but it was kind of seamlessly done in a way that they could not figure out who could possibly have done that, and that to me was really, really good. That's really fascinating.
You have actually hit upon a difference between the old and the new version, which I hadn't thought to mention, but the celebrity version, the ways the tasks are designed differently, such that there are more opportunities. There's continuous opportunities to earn money. So you'll be in a competition where various people have to scoop water into buckets, basically, and the amount of water they get in those buckets equates to the amount of money that they earn from the task. So it's very granular. It's analog. It's not digital. Whereas in the newer version of the mole, the tasks can just outright fail, and nothing comes of it, which means that it's very difficult to. it'd be much more fun if you saw more of the tasks and there were more opportunities for massaging them. Whereas in the new version, it's just all or nothing, and it means that it just ends up being quite. There's no kind of way in for the mole to really massage things without being overt, and it means that the people who are pretending to be the mole also need to be kind of exasperatingly overt.
Also, watching people relentlessly fail, just unless it's perhaps The Apprentice, is rarely entertaining at all. Like it feels like you've got to give the contestants some wins, otherwise it's just kind of grueling to watch. Perhaps.
Talking of grueling, shall we get on to the Traitors itself?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a comparable show in that there are traitors amongst the team of contestants, but we know who they are from the very beginning.
Yes.
These contestants are housed in a Scottish castle, and it basically has them play werewolf or mafia, which are both party games in which one or several of the group is secretly choosing to eliminate the rest one by one. And the remaining majority, who are here called the Faithfuls, have to identify and exclude that person or persons with really no information to go on except the choices of who got eliminated and the way that everyone acts under interrogation by the rest of the group. And the Traitors is different from a game of Werewolf or Mafia because it extends over a number of days, and it intersperses this with a sort of game show style activities during the day to build the prize pot. But unlike the mole, there's no reason for the Traitors to ever sabotage this effort, because once everybody's collaborated in building this prize pot, if there's a traitor in the last surviving trio of contestants, they take it all. Or is it 4 contestants? Last surviving 4 contestants, they take it all if they're still in and haven't been voted out. So unlike the mole, you know who the traitor is from the start, and it's great and unexpectedly brutal.
And also, it's brutal, but also heartwarming at the same time. And I think it's laser targeted at the Christmas break. A lot of the design of the show, to me, feels as though it's got that Agatha Christie feel because it's set in this extraordinary castle in Scotland, and they all go in, and there's the traitors. There's lots of kind of the trappings of it are wonderful. So the traitors, when they choose who they're going to murder that evening, they walk very slowly with lanterns and cloaks, hooded cloaks, up into a turret in the castle, and then they all pull back their cloaks and have a discussion about who they're going to murder. And there's a real sense of fun to the setting. I think Claudia Winkleman hosts. I think she's fantastic because she's able to be just kind of the stern, the person who could deliver bad news, but she clearly she clearly loves them as well. Like by the end of the show, you can see that she's sort of friends with them and actually really wants them to win, and is kind of fascinated to see who succeeds. And one of my favorite moments is the bit where she's walking away at the end, and the mic's on, and one of the winners just starts swearing with delight. She's like, "No, this is the final shot of the show. You can't go swearing like that." And I absolutely love that they left that in. And to me, that's kind of one of the things that really separates the Traitors from other shows, is that all of its kind of theatrical trappings are so fun and over the top that it kind of lends an air of it's kind of quite camp, and yet within this framework, brutal accusations, just bizarre leaps of logic, absolute galaxy brain conspiracy theories about who might be the traitor, and the fact that they show all of their workings, and you get a lot of the logic. I say logic. A lot of it is just absolutely bonkers. I just don't like this person, except I need to justify it by saying that, or at dinner, when everyone lifted their cups to cheers, you didn't lift your cup, and therefore that raised suspicion. And in fact, the person who didn't lift the cup had one arm, and she defends herself by saying, "No, I don't, because and that's the level of sort of brutality it got to, where the sort of accusations became like weirdly personal. And one of the great things about the show for me is how diverse the people are. Like, they're people of different ages, with backgrounds, and they all have just like really different perspectives, and they all have their own biases as well. And when there are so many people, so like 20 of them, 22 of them, with so little information to go on, all they have to fall back on is sort of microaggression, like tiny moments of bits of behavior, gossip, and their own biases, and they just catch fire and flare up from episode to episode, to the extent that they all become so intense with each other. And actually, like by episode 2, my parents stopped watching it because they thought it was ridiculous. Because they're like, why are people crying? Like, why are people just in tears and screaming and shouting and sort of like rending their garments and sort of going just absolutely insane in this kind of just after day 2? But that dynamic continues, and to me, I believed it. Actually, I don't know. Did you?
Oh, I don't think it was faked. I
No,
think,
I don't think so.
I think they had. There was just something about the social construction there which got people into this hyper emotional state.
Mm.
I think you're right. It's because they didn't have anything to go on that it meant that things got intensely personal and minor, and that in itself caused greater sort of offense to the people who are being accused.
Yeah.
Than would have otherwise if they had actual kind of, if they'd been doing anything, you know, any kind of verb other than, you know, I didn't raise a glass with a hand I don't have, you know. It's, I think the instant mistake of the faithfuls is that they believe or act as though the traitors are going to be evil or in an overt way or irritating, whereas, you know, rather than just being contestants on a game show just like them. And so it means that not only do they start attacking people for like conspicuous but very minor character flaws rather than anything that would be strategically useful as a traitor, such as being invisible, but they also feel free to do so with like the maximum vitriol of righteousness. And like it goes through like stages where initially it's just, it builds up to this incredible brutal free-for-all, and then over the subsequent episodes they begin to kind of get a handle on their emotions and start to realize that by making these decisions in this emotional state and they're looking for the wrong things a lot of the time, they start to be a bit more kind of circumspect in the way that they approach the puzzle before them, although at no point do they really have anything to go on, which is I think one of the strengths and also the weaknesses of the show. Like I think in our friendship group we all said that we ended up wanting the traitors to win for at least a large part of the show, and I think that's partly because, I mean, it's partly because a lot of the faithfuls are actually quite unlikable. I hesitate to say that because obviously the way these shows are cut can make people seem less appealing than they are, and obviously everybody's in this heightened emotional state as well. I feel sorry for example, like there's a guy called Imran who claims to be the person in the world, the youngest person in the world to have received, I think, a physics PhD. And the thing is, it constantly cuts away to confessionals where he's saying that again and again and again. And obviously that makes him look super conceited. But I'm sure like every character in that, every contestant in it is asked why that they give us a reason why you would be good at this. And so each of them has to come up with something that's a little bit self-aggrandizing. And the fact that it's repeated and repeated and repeated is just a sign that the producers asked him to say it a bunch of times, you know. That's probably prompted. But anyway, so it kind of, the show fits him up to be this sort of like early stage pseudo villain for other people to kind of kick, which is kind of unpleasant to watch. And then there's another magician in it who, like all magicians, are fairly insufferable. There's a guy called John who is just incredibly lacking in compassion for another fellow contestant who's obviously having a hard time. There's a receptionist / actress who, for me, became sort of the major villain of the piece. Through no particular ill will on her part, but just she's obsessed with pursuing these lines of inquiry that don't make any fucking sense at all.
What's incredible about it is that she's got 2 suspects and she's right about one of them, but for absolutely batshit reasons. It's really good. And she just hates Aaron for some reason. Like she just goes after it.
Poor Aaron. That guy has literally never had a thought in his head.
I love Aaron. I felt so bad for him just being targeted, and he was just sitting there being Aaron.
Yeah.
It was just guilty being Aaron. I love also Maddie, the receptionist and actress. I love the bit where she says she was played. She played a woman without a womb on Casualty. That phrase has been like stuck in my head ever since then.
Her delivery of those lines is so funny.
Yes,
so
she's very funny.
I do wonder if she is actually playing Maddie. It's hard to know. It is one of the most stellar performances of all time if she isn't her actual self.
But also, like, speak to the how I think, even though there's so many of them, the fact we could call back so many memories even weeks after watching the show shows how kind of interesting and as people they are, and how much of we got to see of a bunch of them. I found like Andrea really interesting, and I felt as though perhaps the editing went against her a bit, because she comes across as constantly playing the age card, like she's 72 or something like that. And she's constantly saying, at one point she accuses someone for just being young, which isn't editing. She just did that, like at one of the round table. The round table is where the contestants accuse each other or interrogate each other before they make a decision about who to banish. She's just like, well, only young people could do this, and then get a young person to do this. So you're the youngest one, so I'm voting for you. Pretty much was the logic. But then, like, actually, much later on, there's a little moment she has with Aaron where they're playing bowls, or this kind of like throwing. There's a kind of weird card game they're playing, and she's sort of just recounting memories of what it was like to grow up in the 60s, and it was completely bouncing off Aaron. Obviously, he was sort of like nodding and like, and it sort of cuts to him. He's like, "Wow, I never knew that the past existed," or something.
Yeah,
it's sort of like her insights were wasted on him, but like, wow, that's really interesting. You're actually a really interesting person. Lots of
a lesbian growing up in the 60s and having moved to Belgium, and then coming back at the age of 72 to appear in quite a physically demanding and mentally demanding, emotionally demanding reality TV show. She's a really interesting character.
She's a really interesting character, but you don't see that until much later. And I feel like this again is one of the problems with having so many people on the show, is that they have to sort of pigeonhole her as the old person who judges young people, and even though she did in that one round table, she must have said loads of interesting stuff outside of that would have made her fascinating. And also, there's kind of one of the things the edits can't get around is how much other contestants liked her. So that all these off-screen conversations that are happening that don't make it into the show, like there are some people where it could seem jarring as a viewer, where everyone just really likes this one person, because you've never seen all the interesting conversations they've had and how kind of the rapport they've built off screen, and they won't have been building that rapport for sinister reasons to manipulate anyone. It's just because they're really cool, a cool person. I feel like people like Andrea did get a bit hard done by from the show. I really enjoyed her attitude. She just wanted to sort of participate and win and sort of be part of a team. And actually, one of the things about the show that you touched on there is, I think the physicality of some of the tasks I found a little bit uncomfortable, given the ability of the people involved. Getting a 72-year-old woman to go through a really tight laser maze and then be judged for not getting enough money just felt a bit off for me. I don't know if that struck you.
Yeah, I mean, I thought actually quite a lot of the tasks were a little too hardcore for me to watch. I mean, there's one where some people are buried alive, and like, I don't. I know that I wouldn't have been able to cope with that at all. And I assume they select contestants who've ticked the box saying I'm not claustrophobic or whatever. But still, I felt like that was a level of kind of physical trauma which was probably not required by the nature of the competition. But then I don't know really that there is any useful purpose from the viewer's perspective for the sort of daily activities at all.
Yes,
because like I said before, there's no reason for the traitors to sabotage them. So everybody's working together, and actually they just aren't that interesting to watch. Therefore, because you're so invested in the actual kind of overall competition, that those feel unnecessary or digressionary, even. Like, I think the thing is, they are necessary from the perspective of the makers of the program, because you do need you need time and an activity for the players to bond together over. I think if you didn't have that and you had the sort of omnidirectional paranoia of the mole, things would break down really quickly. Like somebody definitely would have died if they had tried to do that on the on the traitors. And I
think
also
that's true.
think like I think they, in an interview with Claudia Winkleman later, she just described it as therapy because the evening kind of debates were so personal, acrimonious. They needed this task that they could all do together to remind themselves that each and every one of them was actually a human.
Yeah.
And so I think from that perspective, I think it was useful. But I have to admit, I skipped a bunch of them because I just didn't care.
Yeah, this is the point where with like friends and family saw over Christmas, and again, brilliant time to release it because of course everyone's got the free time to watch it, and so everyone gets their Christmas dinner chats in, their opinions on everyone. And this is the point where everyone disagreed with me, where I was like, why have teams if there's no point in any one of them winning or losing? Like, if one of the team comes second but still gets the money, there's literally no consequence or reason. There's no competition. So I was like, why isn't there any sort of jeopardy to the tasks? Everyone's sort of rowing in the same direction and trying to get as much money for the prize pot as they can. Then why have three teams trying to free their people from being buried alive? There's almost no point in any of it, apart from, as you say, the psychological benefits of the kind of benefit of bringing them together. And I felt kind of weird afterwards because everyone I spoke to said, well, no, those are just like the nice bits. The tasks are the bits where everyone's just nice for a bit, because otherwise it would just be this brutal kind of just an mutually assured annihilation of each other's personalities based on just flimsy judgments. And it's a good point you make about the round table in particular, because we see, I don't know, a cut down, maybe 5-10 minute slice of that. I bet that shoot must have gone for like an hour or so, or maybe more.
Oh, they look so tired by the end of each one of them. It must be a long session.
Must be a really long session. Obviously, they're picking the bits out, and you don't know when the producer's stepping in and trying to trigger discussion or asking people to speak. So there might be that pressure to put yourself forward and say something or to start something. You don't know what the dynamics are like between like the actual production staff and the contestants actually having to go through this stuff. And I think it is always worth bearing in mind how grueling that must be for them to go through that every day. And I think, especially in the case of Kieran and a couple of others, they had a kind of 1,000-yard stare at the end that was like, they were just kind of done with it. And actually, Aaron hit that point quite early on because Maddie had been relentlessly accusing him at the round table for like several days straight. And there was a point where he was just going into the confessional, be like, I just don't really care about this anymore. I'm just kind of done with it. I like being here, but what's the point if I'm just going to get accused every day? I really felt bad for him, because I hope it's the same. I'd be like, why? What am I doing here? Yeah, so I think it's interesting to consider the behind the scenes, the reality behind the reality TV of what it's like to actually sit down in front of hot cameras under hot lights with loads of people around, having to be almost be potentially baited into having arguments with other human beings you've only just met. I mean, that's my worst nightmare, basically. So yeah, I did feel bad for them in a way. Some of them were horrible, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, particularly John, who I'm sure is a lovely person in reality, but he gets into it with Aaron as well. And like Aaron just asked him some questions about what he does as a therapist. Like, I think he works as a spa therapist, and Aaron was asking him questions about that. And John interprets that as like some sort of more interrogation, as though Aaron was going to do something terrible with that information. What was Aaron going to do? And he's completely unsympathetic when Aaron ends up in tears. And I don't know. Yeah, so it's gruesome to watch. But I think, as well as being like sort of the faithfuls, basically are responsible for reaching that level of drama almost instantaneously. Like, they are far nastier to each other than anything that the traitors themselves invoke. And for that reason, it's hard to sympathize with them as a group, but also like they don't have anything interesting to do with what they've observed, and I think that makes them difficult to sympathize with. Because by contrast, the traitors have strategy at their disposal. They get to discuss things privately. They get to discuss who they're going to eliminate privately and what the effects on the group of that will be. Inevitably, that invites you to think about their situation, put yourself in their shoes, and think about what would be strategically wise to do. And there's nothing, you can't do that with the faithfuls. I mean, the only thing you can say is, oh, I guess correctly, be more right. That's the only kind of strategy that the faithfuls have. And things get more interesting, I think, when the faithfuls get the opportunity to earn shields, which are these like boons which give them a chance at avoiding elimination by the traitors. And that changes the traitors' tactics, because they just simply a group of faithfuls having the potential to have shields means that the traitors are unlikely to pick any of them for elimination that night, because it could end up eliminating somebody who can just deflect the elimination instantaneously. But I think the game could have done with more ways in which the faithfuls could, if not like identify the traitors easier, then like exert some sort of strategy, because it's very difficult for you to put yourself in their shoes when it comes to the kind of that larger competition. I don't know if like there's a limit to that they could impose, however, right? Because the show ultimately needs to air for 12 episodes. So they can't give the faithful too many tools, because then that could end up with all the traitors being booted 4 episodes in. And I don't know if they could sustain like a traitorless. I mean, I imagine it could, actually, with the amount of paranoia that was going on. But I don't know. Do you feel like they should allow the traitors to sabotage missions then?
You know what? I have had my mind changed about this, because initially I was like, there has to be some sort of jeopardy, not like a total fail. That's way too much. But it feels as though if there's a way for the traitors to siphon off money for their own pot, something like that. I think the shield is the only game mechanic that exists in the tasks at all. Like all the rest of splitting into teams, racing around, all of it is meaningless basically, because everyone's trying to do the same thing as fast as they can. And as Claudia Wickman observed, it is supposed to be the positive part of the show, and obviously it did make get to bond a bit and work together. But I don't know. There's sort of feels like a bit more structure to the faithfuls. Workings might be useful. I mean, I don't know, it's very easy to sort of armchair game design this stuff, because the show is great. Like, it's really good, and it probably doesn't need fixing at all, really.
Yeah,
but because it's obviously hugely successful. But it's stuff like imagine if, for example, I don't know, the faithful one night they get to people are chosen to run supper clubs, but they get to choose who to invite, and they're dining in separate rooms, something like that. A bit of structure to, and then suddenly people are thinking about, well, why did they invite him and not me? I thought we were friends. I thought something like that, just a bit of texture to the faithful side of things, because it was kind of chaos, because it's basically a random chat in the billiards room. Some people get together near the toilets, and then some people are over here, and maybe that's better for the dynamics. Maybe you get more stuff that way. But as a viewer, it felt kind of chaotic, and it sort of painted the faithful, made them look stupider than I think they are. Because if I was actually in the situation like that with so many people around and so little information, I would probably be making stupid judgments as well, and coming up with Maddie style, actual kind of conspiracy wall, photos everywhere, or a picture of JFK over there next to John, and just kind of really get into the root of things. There's other stuff like so they all go to their separate lodgings at night, which is seems essential, because then they don't know who the traitors are who come back, so they all have to be separate. The weird thing about the American show is they pretend they stay in the manor. I have no idea why. There's some weird kind of differences with the American show that I'd love some people who know about production to dig into, about why that might be more appealing to American audiences.
I guess it's just evoking the more murder mystery style thing.
Yeah, there's different hosts in the American version. Instead of just having a load of people who don't know what the show is, half the people are actually already reality stars, hence Kate being on it, and half the people are just normal people, which has its own dynamic, because the reality stars don't need the money; they're there for their own pure status. And so they've introduced a completely different dynamic for that audience. Whereas in this one, they just let people loose on each other, and it was while the people were mostly polite, it was brutal. I found actually. as we've been talking about it and going back over, I was like, wow, that thing that the person said was really, really mean, actually. Made that person really sad.
I wonder if there's a moment where the traitors have to identify their target for that evening by giving them a kiss.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was really exciting and tense. And I feel like maybe, even though it would expose the traitors to a greater risk of being identified, maybe the traitors shouldn't be allowed to conspire in secret. Maybe they should have to conspire in public, but also there should be reasons for why the faithful would end up chatting to each other in secret as well. Maybe that wouldn't work. Maybe it would be too easy to boot the traitors too early on then. But I feel like that was one of the moments of extreme risk for the traitors, and that was really exciting to watch.
It was really interesting because I think Amanda volunteered to do it in the end, didn't they? Because one of us has to do it, and there's a really interesting dynamic to that. In that it's kind of like, could Wilf have gone and just kissed one of the guys like that? And there's maybe for sure, but I mean, that consideration is there, right? If that's not his body language and how he's been with other people in the show to that point, he suddenly does something a bit intimate like that. Even if it's just like a peck, like suddenly that's odd, isn't it? That's notable. Whereas,
there's so many ways in which that could have fallen out as well. Like, what if somebody else had come up and kissed Amanda, and she felt like to kiss them, or maybe it was just too risky to kiss that guy, but she felt she needed to eliminate somebody, so she kisses somebody else, and the repercussions of that are different from what they expected and more dangerous for them. That kind of stuff. I felt like it could have done with more of that stuff. And I think there are versions of like Werewolf and Mafia which do actually introduce weirder and kind of more asymmetric dynamics, which perhaps the show could adopt in further seasons. I don't know.
Yeah, it feels as though it's an amazing starting point, isn't it, for inevitable future seasons.
But do you think that like future contestants are going to experience the same emotional carnage as this first group? I think partly because it was so unexpected is the way is the reason that it turned out as it did. I think maybe future seasons people they'd come to it knowing that they shouldn't just pick on people who look a bit odd or whatever.
It sometimes did boil down to that. Like, it really did. Like, it was just sort of naked bias. This is the thing. The first season is always the purest in some ways, and I feel as though the Traitors in particular, especially seeing how people like John did come across, they would know how not to act, and so maybe people would be more. Maybe they'd just be more polite. I don't know what would happen. And also, if you're being whisked off to a Scottish manor, it's quite unlikely they'll move from there because this location. That's one of the other good things about the show. The location is spectacular. The surrounding, the grounds and everything else about it. Actually, looking at the show and watching it and seeing these zooming drone shots and helicopter shots across lochs is is a beautiful part of the world. So as soon as they rock up to that castle, they're going to know what they're in for, right? And it's going to be. But again, I think that makes the second season interesting in a different way. But then by the third season, will it still be? Will it just become rote by that point? Because seeing how contestants respond to having seen the first season is interesting in its own right. And I think there is something about the format, and again that pressure cooker nature of it. Actually, some people do. I think probably would just show their colours and not be able to keep up the pretense of, being, hey, I want to be the good guy in this and come out with a good deal on the other side. Some of them might actually just sort of get so into it during one of those round tables and actually just let fly. And that did happen at times. And it was good because it wasn't people shouting over each other a lot. And what was so brutal about it was very direct, targeted personal attacks across the table.
And also some of the tasks which forced people to identify as a group who they thought was the least trustworthy and stuff like this. Or, who's the most judgmental. And that poor Faye lady kept getting picked on. Like, Would you ever be a contestant on this show, Tom?
Hell no.
Would you be a contestant on any reality TV show?
No. I think first of all, like it just looks like a harrowing experience for most people who do it. But secondly, also as sort of the media environment that these shows exist in, there's a sense that it's not a sense; it's a real consequence. If you put yourself out there on a public television show, to some corners of the media, you're fair game. Your life is fair game from that point onwards. And actually, just being on telly and being on screen, and if you become a character, you might just get followed around for years, depending on what the fallout of that is. And going into one of those things, like, it's so unpredictable whether you'll become Nasty Nick or whether you'll become a really liked character, whether you'll fade into obscurity, whether you'll have paparazzi outside your house or whatever, or just people writing stories about you or digging into your past or whatever. Just invasion of personal privacy. The sense that by being on one of those shows, and from the media's perspective, be seeking to gain from that makes you in some way a public figure. And I think some of the people go onto these shows, not all, because as we talked about earlier, lots of them are seeking promotion and are seeking higher status in the public eye. Sometimes, like, a lot of people just wonder, it's one of these shows perhaps might not fully anticipate that's a potential backlash, and potentially a life-ruining one as well. I mean, would you go?
Joyous note on which to end this podcast.
No, would you go on one?
Oh, fuck no!
No, it's horrible.
Absolutely don't court that. That level of attention would be hateful, I think. But also, I just don't think that there would be any way in which I would come across well on these shows. And I know that all my personal foibles, of which there are many, would be edited to be exposed in the most traumatic and humiliating possible way. So, yeah, I think Bastard Marsh may remain a private character rather than a public one.
Oh, what might have been.
Do you have anything else to say on this topic, Tom? Or should we close it off there?
I feel like we should close it off there. But I'm really keen to hear what people think about it. So we've been through so many shows, and Traitors in particular is just fresh on our minds. But I'm glad that we kind of covered like a bunch of different genres and sort of dug into, I don't know, kind of curious to people's thoughts bouncing off this.
And if you've been on one of these shows, let us know what it was like. You can send us questions if you like at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. You can see this as a video on YouTube at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you can join us on Discord, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been the Bastard Marsh Davis.
I've been the good guy Tom Senior.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everyone.